Welcome everyone. We are back with more news on the Vintage Story, Adventure Mode, and Hightail situation, whatever you want to refer to it as. But for anybody who maybe has missed some of the news in recent days and weeks, there was an original message put out by Tyron, the lead developer of Vintage Story, who used to work on a game called Hightail. Hightail was recently canceled by its parent studio, and Tyron released this basically saying the fans are welcome here. And in this statement, he also mentions that the developers who might have lost their job and stuff apply with us here at Vintage Story, and maybe there's a side project or something we can work on. Well, there was a follow-up to that with some very specific stuff on Saturday. I believe that was the 5th of July, just after the holiday. But yeah, they said a little bit more specific stuff here, and we've got a bit of backlash from this. So there was nothing set in stone, obviously, in this. They just said that they were actually looking through applications and stuff like that, and they previewed maybe some of the new changes we could see. But again, nothing set in stone, and there's definitely been some backlash from the player base, and Tyron has addressed it now. So there's been an update on the 6th of July, which was yesterday as the recording of this, and we're going to cover this. So I just want to keep you guys up to date on what's going on. And of course, you know, if anything new is released with Vintage Story, you can always count on me covering here on the channel. So make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, share this video around with anybody who might be interested but hasn't been in the loop and stuff. And let's dive right into the new information. Okay, so he's got the different objections that he responds to in red here, so we're going to read those first, and then we'll read his response to them. First, he says, thank you to everybody for voicing your concerns, and the first one he addresses is, it's a bad name for a new project. And I assume this is referring to the words Adventure Mode. I assume, I'm not sure because he doesn't list it here, but I agree, Adventure Mode's pretty bland, and yeah, and he agrees too. They're going to rename it to something else. Good, we won. Finish Vintage Story first. That's the next complaint. And this is one I actually kind of agree with in a sense, but the idea of releasing DLC or downloadable content for an early access game has always kind of irked me in a way, but at the same time, the term early access is very loose, and it can apply to so many different types of games which are still in development. Like Vintage Story, they could end development now, and it could be a very good standalone game just as it is, you know. And so releasing DLC for a game like Vintage Story isn't the worst thing in the world, but Tyron does have a very specific couple of paragraphs, so let's read what he says to this. We have now 24 people in our team, of which 15 are contributing to the game itself. And then he says, I guess he needs to update his website or something. If there's one thing I have learned from hiring this many people is that it made us more ambitious, but not necessarily quicker. Okay, I still carefully review almost every game mechanic and game mechanic or engine altering code change that gets added to the game. And Sarity, who I believe is his wife, still looks over nearly every piece of art and modeling change to ensure that Vintage Story remains true to its original vision. That's a very important sentence or two right here. Keep this in your mind. So the bottleneck for all development is Tyron and his wife themselves. They have to look over and approve everything, which is not necessarily a bad thing. As he states, that allows them to keep the true vision, original vision of Vintage Story, you know, on track. And he goes on to say here that we can only do so much. I can assure you, adding more team members will dilute this vision. Sarity and me would no longer be able to review all the changes the team makes. Let's go ahead and read the second paragraph here, because I've already got some objections, but I'm going to have some more objections after we read this second one here. It is already a significant struggle for me to put together the devlog post, the things we're reading right now. He's saying he struggles to put these together because there are so many changes being made to the main game on each update. Now, this is a clear case of something that needs to be delegated. I understand that he wants to look through every code change and art change to the game itself, but you could easily hire a secretary or a communications specialist to simply put together the devlog change post, and then he could just proofread it before they post it. But he's definitely a very hands-on type of manager. He wants that control, which is something, again, he says later here in this paragraph is not the case. So let's read on. More people means more opinions, means more possible development directions. And this is interesting here, we had to split our weekly meetings into 2 subgroups where each group can talk only every second week because there were simply too many voices going on at the same time. So yeah, apparently a little bit of insight into the background of the development here, but I guess 24 people is almost too much for him to handle, is what he's saying here, it seems like. I don't like it because I want everyone in the team to have a voice, but due to the team size, this is no longer possible. We in Vintage Story team are not fond of strongly hierarchical management structures, completely contradicting what he says up here in his first paragraph. I mean, maybe this is just my opinion, but I would define a manager who has to check off every single change, artistic or code. That is a rigid management structure there, my friend. Despite if you don't want to say that it is, that's exactly what it is. And again, no fault for that. If that's how you want to run your company, go ahead, my friend. You've been doing it really great so far. It's just, let's own up to the reality of the situation. You do have a hierarchical management structure, my friend, where only the leadership gets to decide what to add. I mean, again, completely contradicting the first paragraph here. And if we want Vintage Story in its full glory and with its original vision, then we need to stop diluting the vision. In other words, don't hire more people. Lastly, finishing Vintage Story to its full glory would take 10 to 20 years or more, if ever. Yeah, there's just so much interesting mechanics that could be added still. This is something that cannot be done quickly. So right there, we get a kind of an idea of Tyron's timeline for the game. It will never be truly finished. So again, like I said, some definite objections, and there's some confusing things in here which kind of seem to contradict each other. Again, maybe it's just my interpretation of what he's saying. Let me know what you guys think of these first couple paragraphs down in the comments. Again, I could be totally off, but all right, let's read the next one. Spend that money on Vintage Story instead. So don't spend it on these developers from Hightail, put it back into Vintage Story. And he just basically reiterates what he said above. Adding more team members is very difficult. So if not more team members, why make us of these additional why not make us of these additional funds for a small side project? See, definitely needs a communication specialist here, I think, is what I'm seeing for sure. I mean, we've got typos and stuff, but okay, let's just move on. Individual contributors to the original Vintage Story experience in terms of common systems, as mentioned, is a lot easier to manage than 3 to 4 people doing the same thing, but full time. I have to read this sentence again. Individual contributions to the original Vintage Story experience in terms of common systems, as mentioned, is a lot easier to manage than 3 to 4 people doing the same thing but full time. I got to tell you, I don't even fully understand this sentence, but I'm not going to belabor it again here. I mean, yeah, I think he could have just said see above right here with this, and we'll just take that as his explanation. Why not spend more money? So let's move on to the next one. Go to Steam first. It's too ambitious. It's too risky. And he says money is not the bottleneck. That's right. We've already established that the bottleneck is himself and his wife. And again, if that's how he chooses to, run the development, I think that's not a bad thing. I love Vintage Story the way it is, and I'd hate to see it derailed by some rogue developer who joins the team and just is able to overpower everybody else or something. I don't know. But the next one people objected to, what they said, I paid for Vintage Story, not this. And you got Vintage Story in the very exact form as advertised, with many more updates to come. I'm not sure how this is not a fair exchange. You will be spread thin for project management. And it sounds like he's already spread himself thin up here. He's saying we've got 24 people and they already have to split their groups and stuff, so they're already spread thin, it sounds like. But his response, going from past experiences, I doubt it. let me tell you about two previous side projects. Vintage Hosting. This had a very large initial time investment because I wrote a lot of code for it, but now there's pretty much a self-running service. I maybe spend 2 hours per month on this, and I look at game server issues. Okay. And Secret Game Project. This also took some time to set up, albeit much less time than Vintage Hosting, and I am checking up on the progress of the regular basis. It's been maybe 1.5 hours per month on this. If you tally that up, both of these projects result in 2% of my total time. 98% of my time goes to managing Vintage Story. Okay, so once this new project is fully set up, it should be able to run mostly independent from me, the exception being when there are engine changes that would benefit both projects. I do find this a rather interesting statement. He says, once the new project is fully set up, it should be able to run mostly independent from me. I guess what he's referring to, once it's all set up. So once he's gone through every code change and his wife is okayed every artistic change, then it can pretty much run on its own with only 2% of his time being spent to it. Hopefully that's the case. Hopefully every side project that they do is exactly the same as the last one. There are no deviations, no, anomalies, anything like that. Of course, I'm being facetious here. No two side projects are going to be identical. So, of course, the only thing you can do is go off your past experiences, as he's doing here, but to say that this is going to guarantee, that it won't be distracting to me in the future, I think that's a bit of a stretch to say that, but there it is. So this is feature creep. It should be the exact opposite. This is Tyron here, since it's 80 to 90% of a separate project. If anything, it would be more feature creep if we were to hire more devs on the main team. Again, lacking punctuation. This new mode should be a separate project. Well, I think that's kind of what they described it as, didn't they? This would prevent us from sharing code between both projects, decreasing the symbiotic benefit. I mean, I don't see why it couldn't be like a separate project, but then you still share amongst yourselves. I don't know. Either way, this one right here I don't really see as a valid complaint. It's kind of how I interpreted it already, just from their original announcement. It's going to be a separate project. And here's the next complaint. If it becomes a separate game, will existing Vintage Story players have to pay for it? Now, again, this is a question that's like, how do they know? They don't have any idea yet. He says this is a good argument. It would be fair if existing players could get it for free or at a specific discount or significant discount. Well, there you go. He's definitely, that's one thing I know about Tyron. He's definitely on the side of the players, He's not one of these greedy developers or anything like that. No. In fact, one of the reasons they say they don't want to go to Steam, if you've ever read their frequently asked questions pages here on the website, is because they want to be able to offer people a better refund policy. If they go to Steam, they're locked into Steam's guidelines for refunds, but Tyron says he wants to be more generous. He wants to give people more time, greater leeway with their return. So again, he is on our side for sure. But he definitely seems like a guy who knows what he wants. Nothing wrong with that. So let's read on. Vintage Story will lose its identity / the new project will bleed into Vintage Story. The reuse of mechanics in Vintage Story will make it like Hightail. Oh, interesting. So they're saying, that the bleed over will cause Vintage Story to become more like Hightail because you've got these Hightail developers adding stuff, and if the two projects are sharing, that's interesting. I think that's a valid objection to a degree. And let's see what he has to say. In the sentence where, in the sentence where I mentioned both projects can benefit, I meant it in terms of pure engine tech, not game content, such as better hit scanning, tighter weapons, tool interaction, stats effects, stronger mod API, more robust, yada yada, stuff that has already been requested in the requests by players or in the back of our minds. Okay, hold on, I gotta reread this one. Okay, so he's just basically saying that his original statement was misinterpreted by the player base here, that this objection is taking his original statement too far. which I think is fair. Obviously he's got very tight control of what goes into the game. I cannot emphasize this enough. There's absolutely no intention to ever mix these two game genres. Vintage Story will remain the gritty, uncompromising wilderness survival you know today, with more survival mechanics to be added in the future. Sarah T would kill me if that were ever changed. Then one thing I know is they do both actively play Vintage Story 2, which is great. That's what you want. The lead developer, they need to be playing their own game. So I also want to add here that Vintage Story was built with modding in mind from the ground up, to the point where we ourselves use the mod API to add game content. There is no difference. The new mode will be just another vanilla mode to the game. Should engine changes be needed, then this will be available for the original game. But if anything, this merely means we will end up with a stronger modding API. So this is an interesting statement. I don't exactly see how this is really relevant to the objection here. Maybe, and this isn't really what he's saying, but maybe he's just implying that, the game is already heavily modded by random people out there, and it's still, even with a bunch of mods, it's still a very cohesive, Vintage Story feeling game. Even if you put 40, 50 mods in your game, it's still Vintage Story. And of course, personally, I believe that the modding in this game is one of its strongest points, and it's what's going to continue to allow this game to flourish many, many years. I've seen it in other games like RimWorld. When they have active and robust modding communities, games can flourish for decades like that. And I really do anticipate Vintage Story will be that kind of a game in a large part because of its modding community. So shout out to the modders out there. So let's move on. And we're almost done. Just a couple more objections here, folks. But I appreciate you sticking around and listening to me. Hightail failed. Your project might also fail. And Tyron responds, it's definitely within the realm of possibility. Here's a number of reasons why I strongly doubt that, or why this is low impact. This is a run-on sentence. The company grows sustainably. We don't hire over our means. Well, it sounds like he already did. You said that you had to split your meetings and you don't like it. Well, maybe they let somebody go since then. I don't know. So let's see here. The company grows sustainably. We don't hire above our means. I already pulled off a commercially successful game and learned a lot in the process. I am confident I can do it again. That's interesting. It almost sounds like he's viewing this as a separate game entirely. But again, a little too early, I think, to take away that from the statement. We are willing to ship imperfect, flawed products and improve it over time because the alternative is never shipping. There is a symbiotic effect to this. Both projects can benefit from this. Most of all, we don't live off debt. We have continuous revenue stream. Okay, so yeah, they're saying that the Hightail definitely had financial issues. If you look into why that project failed, it was because of money. But it wasn't, I don't want to say it was a lack of money. They had an abundance of money, but it just became a money pit, essentially, for Riot, I believe, was the producer who took it over, the production company or whatever you want to call them, the big corporation who bought it and eventually closed it down. So let's see, imagine if I would have never started Vintage Story in the first place because I was afraid it would fail. None of this would have existed. Too many companies become risk averse and stagnate, or try to deliver the perfect product and fail. This right here is our opportunity to do something right. Yeah, I totally agree with this statement here. I think that's right on, And this objection is kind of a silly objection, Again, I hear this thing too a lot with related to YouTube. People tell me, well, what are you starting a YouTube channel for? You're definitely going to fail, or you might fail at it if, you devote your time to it. It's like, well, you don't know until you've tried. So let's not let that kind of an objection stop us, right? You will abandon abandon, slow down development of Vintage Story. Yeah, again, I don't see abandonment necessarily, maybe a slowdown, but let's see what Tyron has to say. I started development of Vintage Story because that is the kind of game I wanted to play. It's the kind of game Sarah T, my wife, absolutely loves to play. We deeply believe that this game needs to exist. I like that, actually. We will continue on this mission unabated. We are reaching out to the Hightail community and its devs as they too truly and deeply believed in Hightail. This is a chance to maybe at least partially keep that dream alive. We are all on the same boat here. We're all gamers desiring to dive into different game worlds with all our senses, to escape reality for a few moments in time. Why can't we? Why shouldn't we peacefully coexist? Why shouldn't we help each other? And I to tell you, just as a former English major, reading through this is really it's a real struggle. All right, when I worked for Hightail in 2015, I really felt their passion for what they were working on. The team there really believed in the work they did. It was also this very experience that gave me the confidence to start Vintage Story in the first place. It was Noxie that saw my work on World Gen and handed an olive branch to me, believed in my skills to work on their project. Vintage Story might have never seen the day of light without Hightail. Now it is my turn to hand them an olive branch. It is the least I can do. So right there, I think we've got a little bit of insight into what originally motivated this first message right here. Let's finish it off, though. I know many of you have significant emotional investment in Vintage Story. I am well aware of it. I will be careful not to lose sight of that. Yeah. Again, really needs a communication specialist for the team, and just proofread these, and let that person do the writing here, my friend. But regardless, what are my overall thoughts about this statement? Well, I think he's definitely reassured some folks, but it looks like I assume moving forward with the idea still, and it definitely seems like from reading this last couple sentences here that Tyron at least has some fond memories of the people that he worked with in the Hightail project, and for that reason, it sounds like he wants to, as he puts it, extend an olive branch to them. So that's really nice. I would probably call it more of a lifeline because I don't think they were ever in conflict with each other, needing an olive branch, which symbolizes peace, but throwing them a lifeline to help these folks, in their time of need, just as they helped him when he was early on his journey, you know what I'm saying? So that's an honorable type of thing to do. And I have confidence in this development team that they're not going to screw up Vintage Story by doing this or by, looking into new avenues and new projects. Ultimately, I think it will just be beneficial for Vintage Story. I've played a lot of different games from a lot of different developers all across the spectrum, from excellent down to greedy jerks who you just want to, leave on the side of the road and never look at again. And I can tell you, Tyron and his team, they aren't like that. These are good people, in my opinion. And although, the message itself, I've got a few little objections with and things like that, as we covered, I'm still curious to know what you guys think about all this. So please feel free to leave me some comments below. Thank you for tuning in for this one. And of course, if we get more updates, I will cover this as long as you guys keep showing interest in the videos. So thank you, everybody. And once again, I'll have this link down there below. So if you want to check out the devlog and read through it yourself, feel free. I appreciate you guys, and I will see you all on the next one.